Recently, Codemasters updated Dirt Rally 2.0's force feedback. So in this video, I'm going to tell you the settings that we're using with the FANATEC CSL Elite Wheelbase, both on the wheel and in-game. Hold on to your trousers, sip your tea, off we go. Okay, so I've got the settings on the screen here. As you'll notice, they're pretty much the same as when you first load up the game now, because it's reset all the files anyway. So I did spend about an hour messing around with force feedback settings in the game, trying all the different dials and just doing different things, seeing if I could make it better. But really, there's not that much you can do in terms of getting more information from the game. The three things that you can do, though, which will depend on your sort of preference as to what you want, is the self-aligning torque, which affects the actual overall strength of the force feedback in terms of the strength that the wheel wants to return, and will also affect the speed at which the wheel returns. The wheel friction, which acts as essentially like dampening, but it doesn't seem to work like normal dampening in most games where it just dampens things across the board. The wheel friction seems to be some kind of a almost dynamic dampening, so it doesn't just dampen everything. It kind of does seem to be mildly affected by physics, unless I'm imagining things. And we've got the suspension setting, which is supposedly the new fixed setting, which basically, for the most part, just magnifies the track bump feel through the wheels, so that sort of rumble effect that you get if you go off track, you'll feel the rumbles more. If you're going over bumps on the road surface, you feel rumbles more. Unfortunately, with the suspension, you don't tend to feel the actual lean of the car so much, which was one of the nicest things in Dirt Rally 1.0. I'll go a bit more into that when we're actually driving. The collision setting, I've set that to 0. That's basically when you contact stuff, you get like a jolt. I really don't like it. It just makes the driving harder. You might want that on. I don't like it on. And soft lock is for when the wheel hits the maximum rotation for the car. I just put that on 100. To be honest, you shouldn't really be getting into full lock situations with the car anyway. I normally stop him before with my hands, but there you go. I've just left it on. Steering centering force enabled, I just turn off. Normally that's like a spring effect that just always brings the wheel to the centre as if you didn't have a force feedback wheel. When I messed around with this, it didn't seem to really do much anyway. And actually, a lot of the settings in Dirt Rally 2.0 don't seem to do that much, really, on the grand scheme of things. But there it is. Now, I'm, as I say, using the FANATEC CSL Elite PlayStation 4 wheelbase, and on the wheelbase we have our settings on here. And the actual wheelbase settings really have, in many ways, have more of an effect than the game settings. So I'll quickly go through the wheel settings for those of you that have FANATEC wheels. We've got this sense on 50. That's just the sensitivity for the steering. If you configure your wheel in the game to 900 degrees and you're running 900, then you won't need to have this on 50. So basically, just make sure your wheel is 1-to-1 with the in-game wheel. That's what's important, not this actual number. So potentially ignore that. That's just me being lazy. The FF, which I think is the strength for the actual force feedback on the FANATEC wheel side, I put it on 90. You can turn that up and down depending on how strong you want your force feedback from the game. Of course, if you adjust the self-aligning torque in game, that will also affect the strength of the force feedback. It doesn't seem to matter which one particularly you choose over the other. But I've got it on 90 in the wheel. I don't know why. It's just a number that I've gone with that felt nice. The shock settings on 100. These don't really matter. Now, the drift mode, the DR1, the drift mode. This will be pretty important for those of you in terms of actually getting the feel that you want from the game. So, as those of you that have a FANATEC will probably already know this, but if you don't or you're new to it, the drift mode is effectively either dampening. If you put it in minus, it increases the amount of dampening on the wheel. But if you put it in positive, it's kind of it's like anti-dampening. The wheel pushes itself around. Now with the CSL Elite, you never really want it in positive. It doesn't make any sense to do that. With Dirt Rally, what I would say, Dirt Rally 2.0, is you really want it on either -1 or -2. Now, -1 has the advantage of the wheel being looser and you feel more from the game, but it has a disadvantage of the wheel being a bit too overactive and sort of moving around too much, which is kind of unrealistic, but you might want that compromise just to get a little bit more feel from things. And if you put it on -2, it ends up being more dampened, but in many ways the force feedback then feels a little bit more natural, less responsive, but more probably what it feels like in reality in some ways. It's kind of up to you. At the end of the day, we're playing a computer game here, so you know, it's what makes the game more fun or easier to play. I've found on -1, -2, I kind of been alternating. I'm quite happy with -1 at the moment. But, as I say, the wheel friction setting in the game, that on 100 adds in its own sort of dampening on the game. So if you're running a lower real wheel friction in game, then you might want to run more dampening on your FANATEC wheel profile. So wheel friction on 100. I've got this on -1 at the moment. I can't remember what the 4 setting does, but we've got that on 100. Oops, going all over the place here. Put that on 100. And the spring, I mean, it's not. Oh yeah, it's not using these. These are like the I can't remember what you describe them as, like the direct force feedback. These kind of settings are used in legacy games rather than modern sims. This is, I don't think it's using those settings. Brake force, I've got it on 40. Well, I either run 40 or 50, which is very sensitive. I'm using the FANATEC CSL Elite load cell, and really, that's unrealistically sensitive. But you know, I'm in my sim rig for like 5-6 hours a day often, so I don't want to be like knackering in my knees. And I find like with the load cell, it just means I can like lean on the brake. It car moves around nicely. But again, that's just your preference, how sensitive you want your load cell to be. If you've got a potentiometer base pedal or the non-load cell CSL Elites, then you won't have this setting. So ignore that. FEI. Now this is another important one with Dirt Rally 2.0. So what the FEI setting does on the FANATEC wheelbases, with the CSL Elite especially, is it sort of filters out the very high frequency bumps and knocks from the game. So it basically stops that rattling sound or the rattling kind of harsh force feedback that you sometimes get from some games and certain situations. Now, it's in effect, it's more of a filter than it is a dampener. I think I'd describe it more as a filter. But ultimately, if you are running it at anything above 30 in Dirt Rally 2.0 with the settings on the screen, then what I've found is that the bumps and the suspension and what have you cause the wheel to rattle. It just feels a bit unrealistic. If you turn it lower than 30, then you start you start losing the immediacy of the response. You start losing some of the finer details. So it's kind of a balance. But 30 seems to be about right. You might want to try sort of 30 to 50, basically. Anything in that range. And again, it will partly depend on the settings you've got in game. But I found 30 with what we've got in the game at the moment to be pretty decent. So that really covers the wheel settings there. I've saved that to profile 5. Why not? And there you go. That's about as exciting as it gets. Let's get driving here, and I'll talk about what we actually think of the force feedback settings. So I'm going to need a sip of my beverage here before we start driving. I mean, it is a rally stage. It's really important to have a drink. Right. Thermos safely placed in the car cockpit. So,
5, 4, 3, 2.
Talk a bit about the force feedback here. In terms of the changes, then, I would say I don't think it's made a huge difference to the force feedback. From my memory, I still prefer the force feedback in Dirt Rally 1.0. I feel like in Dirt Rally 1.0, you get a much better feel for the weight shift of the car and the actual suspension body compression and movement. Whereas in Dirt Rally 2.0, the suspension is much more sort of self-aligning-y rather than the overall car mass and movement. But it's perfectly fine to drive from. It doesn't stop you from being able to drive or know what's going on. You can generally feel where the grip is, how to move the car through the corner, if you're going a bit too hot into a corner, if the tyres are slipping or if they're bit in with grip. So for the most part, I actually quite like the force feedback in Dirt Rally 2.0. And I do think with the latest update, what they have improved, as I say, is the feel of track bumps with that suspension setting. You can now better feel when you've got a tyre slightly off the road, or even just the actual road texture itself. So you notice a big difference between the road texture on the tarmac stages compared to the texture on the on this sort of off-road stuff. Dirty Australia road with kangaroos. Actually, this is New Zealand, I think. Not seeing the kangaroos. Did they have kangaroos in New Zealand? I think you only get them in Australia. Now, so what's weird though is just those other settings, like the tyre slip setting. Doesn't seem you can't enable it, and I don't think you get actually much of a feel for tyre slip. Whereas I seem to remember that being quite prominent in Dirt Rally 1.0. So that's weird. And also, it just seemed like Codemasters were making a big thing about, oh, we fixed the force feedback, but really, it's such a mild, modest change. At least with this FANATEC CSL Elite, that yeah, I don't know. It wasn't the change I was expecting. I was expecting them to basically have something closer to how the force feedback was in Dirt Rally 1.0. Now, one character that I have noticed more in the force feedback now, which is more noticeable on the tarmac stages than it is on the dirt stages, but as you turn the wheel, when you sort of go over that, it kind of builds up in the force feedback, and obviously when you go over it for the amount of turn that's of use, it does loosen up. But I'd say the end resultant feel of the force feedback now compared to previously is that it does feel a little bit more springy in force feedback feel, which I think some people might equate to being more kind of a rubbery feel. So some people probably like that, but I think people that prefer a more direct kind of force feedback might like it less. But these are all sorts of subjective things for a large part. The component that isn't subjective is the lack of that body roll feel that I think that I would really like, and that unless I'm confabulating, I remember being a big thing in Dirt Rally 1.0. But yeah, subjectively you get more track texture through the wheel, which adds to immersion. Oh, come on. I really love the grass. It's all about the grass, guys. But ultimately, at the end of the day, regardless of the changes in force feedback, the actual handling, it's the same handling as before. It is a very enjoyable to drive game. I really like the physics in Dirt Rally 2.0. It's just really enjoyable to move and flow the car around the stage and try and get the most out of the car. Obviously, it doesn't really, after a while, you're not really doing rallying. You're just doing like hill climb because you've done the stage so many times. But it's just really nice and fun to drive. And being nice to Codemasters, it's a step in the right direction. It is an improvement to the force feedback. So, can't really complain. But it's not something to get massively excited about, is what I'm saying. So, well, there you go. I mean, hopefully the settings there help you out if you've got a FANATEC CSL Elite Wheelbase. Of course, we have a FANATEC affiliate link. You knew I'd stick that in somewhere. If you do decide to get a FANATEC wheel, we've got a link there. You can click that, and then I'll get some money. So there you go. I had to put that in the video, guys. We've got to FAP. If we don't FAP, there's no YouTube channel. So if you've got a Thrustmaster wheel, it will probably require slightly different settings. It'll probably be more of a case of turning down the dampening in the game. What I found with the T300 previously and the TSPC Racer is that they're not as free moving. They've got more inherent dampening to them than the FANATEC CSL Elite. So basically, you'll want to not run any dampening on those wheels in the Thrustmaster Profiler, and you'll want to turn the dampening down in game, that wheel friction value. And that should probably get you better force feedback. And then if you want to get more track texture and bumps, then you will just turn up that suspension effect. And I would say one of the positives, because the Thrustmaster T300 TSPC Racer have more dampening to them inherently, one of the positives is that you can turn up the the rumble effects without it doing like a sort of rattly effect that you then you don't have to compensate for it on those wheels. So there you go. I think that covers it all, really. One exciting video. We're going to be live streaming some dirt rally. We'll have to do some stages against channel members. Would be nice, but the end of the day, I just hope these settings help people out. That's what the point of this video was. It wasn't meant to fully arouse everyone. But there you go. Click the subscribe button if you want to. Click the like button if you want to, and enjoy your cups of teas, because I'm going to be enjoying mine. Until the next one, thanks for watching, everybody, and goodbye.